This isn't directly from Ram Dass's talk earlier today, but when Saraswati and I were coming here in the car, we had a chat about something that I think would be great for her to share, to give people an idea of the different planes that we're all dealing with all the time. Yeah, why don't you just get right into Buddhi, Manas, Chitta, Ahamkara, and Atman. Okay, you gave me such a beautiful description of each in the car. I loved it.
It's so much easier when it's pillow talk. I'm like, oh this, oh that.
Wasn't exactly that, but...
There has been pillow talk, though. Has there not?
Huh?
Do I have to sit in between the two?
Yes, we need help. You know that. You can be our counselor. All right.
Oh, my goodness. So, okay. That's a good way to begin these things. So, put on my vision. So the topic of the whole session has been, the whole retreat has been cessation of the mind. And the chance or the promise of yoga is this Brahmanic state. I love this languaging of the promise of yoga. And what do we trust? What do we turn to? What do we have faith in? And for me, I'm a purist girl, or a classics girl, maybe is a better way to describe it. And so that's where I look to what I can trust is what we're still talking about, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years later. Usually that's a tip. That's something to continue, like Mirabai suggested, books to hang out with. That's a practice. So, and that's a quote from Be Here Now, books to hang out with in the cookbook section. Isn't that right after the brown pages? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's everything you need to know. So if there's something that you feel it was missing or you need or you want, you have it in that book, in that section. You should be able to find something to use to help. It's funny when you go back actually and read that section, it's like, gosh, it's all right here. It's all right here. It's just so interesting. So cessation of the mind means we kind of have to begin to understand a little bit about how the mind operates. And that's the question that Raghu was asking me to share a little bit about how the yoga literature says our mind operates. And then by understanding, and that's actually how I operate a lot, and why I talk a lot when I teach, even teaching yoga, about how things work, and then that I get it somehow in a kind of more visceral way. I'm not a big gap person. Usually if there's gaps in my understanding of something, I'm usually not teaching it yet. And there are a little bit of gaps here, and there's probably people who know more, so I invite you to share on top of the sharing. But let's deconstruct the mind. It's so funny, I'm actually talking about this, but I am interested in this. So the mind is the most outermost aspect of mind is described as manas, which is just the kind of whimsical, fleeting comings and goings of the mind. Mostly driven by our sense desire or aversion, and what I'm liking or not liking in this moment. Right, Benji? Yes. Little Benji? There's two little Benjis in here. So the outermost is this sense of and that we're not... without any filtration, just kind of noticing. And so that's the outer layer of the thinking process. And then as we are exposed to Dharma, then our relationship to our desires change. And I'm just going to just jump ahead for a moment because we've heard about this becoming desireless, like not having desires or going beyond desires and aversion. And actually in the piece yesterday, Ram Dass is quoting the Gita and says, actually the sage has desire. I find that kind of refreshing. It's not that I'm trying to not want anything. As long as we're in a body, I'm going to feel hot, I'm going to feel cold. It just doesn't make so much of a difference to me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's
so,
good.
yeah, so we have desire. But our relationship to desire changes. So there's always, in any moment, there's always two things going on. The thing and your relationship to the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So so desire is not so, and then so when we're talking about the mind, I love to use and yoga. I love to use the word mastery, because that's what we're looking for with yoga, is a kind of mastery over our own energy, of which mind stuff, chitta, is part of how we use our energy. Can you imagine, or let me let you know, that the brain is the most energy consumptive tissue, organ structure in your whole body. Mm. So as you're thinking, you're consuming energy that could otherwise be channeled and banked towards sadhana or seva or kindness. Yeah. So as you think, it's almost like, there is a discipline to stepping towards your practice and the recognition of where thinking is actually taking energy away from your wholesome dharmic life. So then the question is, can I really afford to think as much? And maybe if we have the grace to have that thought, we'll have the grace to then just pivot our consciousness towards Ram. Like go from, I'm thinking, and of a gathered state, and point towards breath or sound or stillness. So that's where we start to decide, have some discriminating thought. Am I on my dharmic path or am I not? That's called buddhi. And as the root word means something like awake, like an awakened state, a discriminating thought. And the symbol is a sword. The sword that says this is in, this is out. And by the way, we think that any action that follows contemplation is dharmic. Even if it leads you into going, gosh, that wasn't the right path, still that was dharmic. Because don't we have to make a lot of mistakes? Still dharmic. So that kind of touches into notes of mindfulness, like being in our experience as it's happening, being with our experience exactly as it is. I think that's how Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche defines Dharma, being with our experience exactly as it is. So that's manas, then moving to buddhi, and then chitta, because really we're actually looking at trying to understand what is Satchitananda. So we're picking it apart, right? And so then chitta, that part of Satchitananda, means all of the different mind stuffs. And Brahman and Atman are a metaphor is an ocean or a lake, as is chitta, that has waves. So chitta is the place of waves, that the place where there are either waves that are swelling up by way of attraction, aversion, so a fluctuation of the mind, want, don't want, attraction, aversion, and then there's a third element that's in that lake, which are sanskaras, or imprints from past lives. And conditioning's in there, but that usually shows up as attraction and inversion.
Yeah.
So all of the things from past lives that are still kind of pouring in, that leads us to, like, we trend towards this kinds of things, and we're like, why? I'm the only one in my family, like that, or whatever it is, imprints. So all of that causes these waves. And so that is that place of chitta. And then ahunkara is a fourth quality of mind, and that is translated as something like ego, or I, like me, I, maker. And the movement of cultivation of ahunkara, because it can be either placed right next to manas, like I'm cold, I'm hot, I'm hungry, I'm mad, I'm sad, whatever it is, can be placed more externally. But then as you move through these other stages of cultivation deeper into the mind, from manas to discriminating buddhi, to a recognition of this whole lake of mind stuff that has something to do with my level of contentment or dis-ease. And then you can place the ahunkara deeper in, which is the cultivated movement from I to just a slight shift to it. So where I'm not cold, but it's cold. Oh, Saraswati's cold. It's hot. It's depressed. So there's the cultivation of the witness is part of ahunkara. And that directly leads us to that there's two things going on, which Ram Dass calls the planes of consciousness. So gathering and identifying with that it place that can see the whole lake, can see the discrimination, buddhi can see the manas. This is sort of the process of purifying and consolidating the mind. And so from that place, we slip through, if you will. Ram Dass says we go in and in and in and through. You heard that somewhere in the, to the other side. He's pointing to the third eye usually and saying through to Brahmanic state, or to Atman, like that.
Very
Okay.
good.
Beautiful.
Very
Yes?
good. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and this all relates with cultivating the cessation of the turnings of the mind. And as you said this yesterday, I believe, it's not a matter of thought not being there. Okay, thought is there, but it's a cessation of the turnings, which means the cessation of the grabbing onto and identifying with it. And I think we want to talk a little bit about, we're going to do breakout groups and give them a little bit more breath today. Ram Dass's, one thing he mentioned that I think it'd be a great topic. He talked about the validity of your identity as something other than what you think you are. And I think if everybody, I'd like you to just say a little bit about your own personal experience with that. We all have that. And Duncan and I, we were up till late last night because one thing to mention, he and I need to actually go earlier tomorrow to downtown Los Angeles to a thing called the Summit, where they've asked us along, and Ram Dass will be Skyped in to do something at this thing, which is a conference around big ideas and so on. And what we've been working on is Krishna Das's statement of you wake up in the morning, and it's the movie of me which you star, direct, and produce, and goes on 24/7. And what we're going to talk about, what the makeup of it is, and of course, identifying with more of the validity of who we really are is the goal of the cessation of the turnings of mind. And we have a lot of help. We're bringing Jack Cornfield and his wife Trudy in to elucidate that whole part. So we were talking about it until late last night. And one of the biggest things that came up, and this is one of my favorite subjects, is trust. Just trusting, like we all have that experience, which is who we really are, one way or another. Can come through a teacher, can come through a psychedelic experience, reading a book, just doing a yoga posture that suddenly clicks in, and all of this identification with who we think we are goes away. So I think it'd be great in these groups for everyone to check in on that one experience that gives you true connectivity with who we are way behind all this stuff. And yes, ma'am.
Yeah. I just wanted to chime in for a second, because every time that we hear Ram Dass talk about that, and you're talking about trust, another word is faith. I mean, so when you hear, like all of us in this room, when you hear like your soul's prompting, where you realize, oh, there is something more to my life but I just don't know what more is. And I'm here to do some research on what more is. That's the point where faith begins, Ram Dass says. That's truly the point where faith begins. And trust, I think, in these practices that we're sharing, and and satsang, people who have come before us, we turn to and say, what have you done? The point where faith begins.
But it does start with trust, which is an easier word than faith in my mind. And I tell this story, I've told it a bunch of times, either on podcasts or in Maui. When I first met Ram Dass, I actually went physically to meet him because I was a program director of a radio station. They wanted me to announce his lecture, and I didn't want to do nothing till I met him. And I did. And then he did one of these stop time. I mean, those big blue eyes of his. And he stopped everything for me in that moment. There wasn't anything else going on except me and his caring for being in one presence between the two of us. And that enormous trust, that trust led me all the way, not within a year, to meeting Maharaji, just because of Ram Dass. That trust in that moment, it was that huge. And I know everyone here has a similar story, or they wouldn't be here, that Maharaji has provided that space for each one of us. So, but can you just, from your lens, talk a little bit about getting, what Ram Dass is talking about in terms of the validity behind who we think we are, and that potential discussion that can go on in these breakout groups?
Yeah, we might even want to start with Ramana Maharshi's practice of neti. When Ramana had his awakening experience, it was around meditating on his death. Remember? Some of you know that story where I think an uncle had died or something, and he was in the home and he was lying down on the floor of a room, a study or something, and he was imagining himself dead, that his breath stopped and his body became rigid, and then he noticed that there was this consciousness beyond his identification with his living body, and he began to explore that through a process of inquiry. And so, who am I? And I'm a man, or I'm a boy, or I'm a woman, or a teacher, or a student, or a yogi, or whatever it might be. Neti, not this, not that. So whatever your process of inquiry is, there is this beautiful dance, and we'll conclude it in a moment now and set you off on your breakouts, but there's this beautiful dance between intention and allowing. Doing some spiritual practice with an intentionality with discipline, with rigor, and then letting go and allowing. So whether it's an inquiry process in which you practice neti neti, I am not who I think I am, I'm not that either, nor am I that, allowing yourself to strip away all of the extraneous definitions of self until you rest in something that is beyond all of those definitions, or just a willingness to not know. The dance is between being willing to not know and then experiencing what flows into that space that we carve out when we show up in those ways. In many traditions, it's called grace. In the Judeo-Christian and Islamic traditions, grace is something that we can't make happen. It's by definition that which happens when we get out of our own way. In Hinduism, it's kripa, and when we call, it doesn't necessarily come, but we, through faith, can allow, that the illumination to pour into that open container that we've built through practice. And then, if we're lucky, the container itself shatters.
Lucky grace.
San Juan de la Cruz, John of the Cross, in his famous poem Dark Night of the Soul, called it an exquisite risk, but it has been actually translated as lucky chance or lucky grace.
Really? Yeah. One other thing to consider, the thing I love best, not best, but I really love about Ram Dass's talk that we watched, at the end he talks about Merrill Wolfe, who I never heard of. You seem to know who he is, yeah.
I have a philosophy degree.
I have nothing. I didn't even go to college.
Good for you.
But he was a scientist, and he...
That's to Maharaji's college.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Got a good degree, I think.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So just talking about him being a scientist, so he was of that bent and did this extraordinary deep meditative practices at the end of his life and had this experience. And when he talks about it, basically it boiled down to he just sat in front of divine presence. And that's what happened with us, with Maharaji. And in those moments, there was no identification with who we thought we were. He eradicated that in the moment. Of course, when we went off, and Krishnadas and I would go off and be depressed by the river, seeing how much we were really identified when we weren't with him in the moment. But that divine presence, I've seen the thread of it in my life that's gone through, starting with that moment with Ram Dass, that I first met him, and carried through with Maharaji, and so many incredible experiences of being in satsang, and it's the same thing. This is the same as when we hung out with Maharaji. Absolutely the same, and in Maui. And I think, when in this breakout session is to really everyone think about that moment everyone has had of being in divine presence, and you're not thinking about yourself.
So that's a good segue into what I want. The seed I want to plant before we break out is that we hear these stories of these beings who have these numinous experiences, or these experiences of union, and it may feel like a very far away and alien gift. But I just want to affirm that it is your birthright, that you've experienced it many times, that it's not some elite, elevated state reserved only for those who are worthy. I mean, we are all worthy, and we all have them, and it's a matter of recognizing them when they come. And so along those lines, I just want to say that a lot of our teachers are going. Someone mentioned Thomas Keating. Who was that? Father Thomas Keating, and Christian.
Duncan,
was right, Duncan, a Christian meditation teacher, a dear teacher of mine actually, Father Thomas Keating, who co-created centering prayer as a practice. A lot of our teachers are leaving this world now. Ram Dass is going to be leaving us soon. And there's this huge
We've been saying that
wave.
for 14
That's true. We've
years.
been saying that for a while.
Maharaji has other ideas about that.
What was that novel? 100 Years of Solitude. Remember the old man just wouldn't die? Everybody kept coming to say goodbye.
Yeah.
Every time I see Ram Dass, I think it's the last time. But it's like this big wave is receding, and a lot of these men, they're often men, who have given us these great teachings and have translated hundreds or thousands of years of Dharma for us. And I see this wave receding, and I see this new beach, this new landscape emerging, in which leadership isn't going to look like it has looked. Our teachers we're not going to be the teachers that our teachers have been, but we are the teachers. You are the emerging leadership. It's lateral, it's interconnected, it's relational. And we are starting right now. The wisdom in this room is staggering. I don't mean that in an abstract way. I mean literally, I cannot believe the wisdom and love present in this gathering. So let's find out what that interconnected, not top-down, but relational leadership looks like. It's starting with affirming that this is our birthright, and we do know what this state to which we aspire is in every cell of our bodies.
So, Kelly?
A couple of guidelines about the breakouts real quick.
Let me just add one more point before we get into the logistics. Some days I'm very interested in Brahmanic state, and other days I just want to feel a little happier. Do you know what I mean? In other words, maybe some of you here are like, enlightenment. I mean, these are big questions, and Brahmanic state feels like, what is that, and so, another teacher of mine talks about these practices, what we're doing here, and definitely leadership. And I love this new landscape emerging because it is. But what we're doing here also really serves finding a way to carve out a little bit of peace in your life for yourself. Truly, to be a happier person, and as we've talked about how that ripples out. And then a second thing is to help other people, to have a little bit of energy to do some seva. So maybe we'll get enlightened, maybe we won't, but I think it's really important to be happy and do seva. So maybe that's also something we can strive for, and part of the identity that you can relate to in the groups as well.
Well, when you're doing those two things, then you are in Brahmanic state because you're not thinking about yourself.
It's possible. Yeah, I'm able to somehow, do all kinds of crazy stuff.
That's true.
It's
Okay, let's do
way
this.
more accessible than we might be leading you to believe. Okay.